Hussein aids and protects terrorists, including members of Al-Qaeda.
We know he's been developing weapons of mass destruction.
The president is right to the threat of weapons of mass destruction.
Rarely talk or mention Osama bin Laden.
But, I just don't spend that much time on him. Leader of Iraq is an evil man. He gassed his own people.
Iraq had nothing to do with this.
What I do oppose is a dumb war.
Saddam must leave Iraq. Refusal to do so will result in military conflict.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
The UK military presence will continue.
More than 20,000 additional American troops to Iraq. We thought he had weapons of mass destruction. Turns out he didn't.
Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain. The Iraq War was an armed conflict that began with the 2003 invasion of Iraq by the United States-led coalition. The invasion regime toppled the government of Saddam Hussein. However, the conflict continued for much of the next decade as an insurgency emerged to oppose the occupying forces and the post-invasion Iraqi government. An estimated 600,000 or more Iraqis were killed in the first 3 to 4 years of conflict. The United States officially withdrew from the country in 2011, but became re-involved in 2014 at the head of a new coalition. The insurgency in many dimensions of the civil armed conflict still continues. Today, to discuss this topic, we have with us today Peter Van Buren. He spent 23 years of service at the U.S. State Department. He also was in Iraq representing the U.S. State Department. He also authored a book on the Iraq War, We Meant Well. Welcome to our show, Peter Van Buren. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Peter Van Buren, let's get to the first question. Iraq was invaded shortly after the 9/11 attacks. Do you think that the threat of Saddam Hussein was exaggerated?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I don't think there was any real threat from Saddam Hussein toward the United States. Keep in mind that America had been bombing and attacking Saddam Hussein for roughly 10 years prior to the 9/11 attacks, 12 years before the 2003 invasion. By that point in time, a combination of the American bombs, the partition of Iraq into 3 areas through the no-fly zones, as well as the attack itself, rendered Saddam basically powerless. There was no reason to attack Iraq in 2003. There was no purpose, and there certainly was no direct threat against the United States.
Peter, you wrote a book, We Meant Well, how, quote-unquote, I helped lose the battle for the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people, which depicts your experience as a diplomat representing the U.S. State Department on ground in Iraq. Were there weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq?
Of course, there were no weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq. That was a very weak excuse that was put forward by the Bush administration to frighten the American people into supporting an unnecessary action by America. There had to be some reason, some justification, and the Bush administration threw out the weapons of mass destruction, knowing that, still shaken up by 9/11, Americans were going to respond to that. I was in Iraq for a year. I studied the situation closely from the State Department, both before and after my time there. I had access to information that was not available to the public, and it is clear there were no weapons of mass destruction, none, zero. There were some old things found that had been laying around literally since the 1980s. Most of those things were more dangerous to handle. They could not even have ever been used. And they were nothing particularly deadly, no nuclear weapons or anything like that. It was simply an excuse, and one that the American people, I'm afraid, swallowed far too quickly and far too enthusiastically.
Peter Van Buren, what were the flaws in the Iraq invasion and how they handled the aftermath?
Well, to begin with, the invasion was unnecessary, and that was obviously the biggest flaw of all, is it didn't need to happen. Once it did happen, the first flaw, of course, was that there was no after plan. Once the Iraqi army was chased away, and they were more chased away than really fought and defeated, because they abandoned the battlefield as much as they actually stood and fought. There was absolutely no idea by the Americans what was going to be done. There was no government, there was no plan to stand up any government in Iraq, nor was there any plan initially by the Americans to govern, control, or secure Iraq. The next mistake in line was the decision by America's person in charge, I guess, Paul Bremer, to disband the entire Iraqi army, police force, and civil service. And so literally overnight, there was no one left in Iraq to keep order, to make sure that the public utilities were running, to teach school, to staff up hospitals. Every single thing that represented organized civilization was done away with. The next failure was the one that I was involved in, and the one I wrote about in my book, We Meant Well, and that is the failure to reconstruct Iraq. Some $40 billion was spent by the United States, supposedly to fix things up in Iraq, to rebuild water and sewer systems, to bring electricity, to bring more schools to people, to pave roads, set up businesses, all those good things. But we failed. We failed terribly. We wasted all that money. Much of it was lost through our own mismanagement. We couldn't keep track of the money. A lot of the money were given to American contractors who didn't do anything with it. Most of the money they spent was on security. A lot of money was given to Iraqi contractors who took the money and ran, or built shoddy construction and left us with broken roads and systems that didn't work, that we didn't manage or supervise. Most of that money was wasted. The so-called benefits the United States gained out of it were little more than short-term propaganda, pointing to pictures of smiling Iraqis standing in front of some project that we built that 6 weeks later was broken, didn't work, and the smiling Iraqis were long gone, as were the cameras.
Okay, last question. Please tell the viewers a little bit more about your book, We Meant Well, so that they may check it out in stores.
Well, I'd encourage everyone to take a look, because the book was written in 2011, just after I got back from Iraq, and published soon after that in 2012. And at the time it came out, when I was doing interviews like this, the interviewer always would ask me some question about, well, why are you so pessimistic about what's going to happen in Iraq? Haven't you seen that we won? That it's successful? The president is on TV telling us we left Iraq with our heads up and in honor. And everyone was predicting a very bright future for the country. I wasn't. And the reason I was predicting trouble, and much of that has unfortunately come to be true, in the fighting between the Kurds, the Sunnis, the Shias, the autocratic government now running Iraq, the influence of the Iranians and other people there, all of that was predicted in my book, and it was predicted because I saw it actually happening on the ground. As the United States continued to deny, for example, that there was Iranian influence in Iraq, in my part, we were out in the eastern part of the country, we were seeing Iraqi vendors coming across the border to sell fruits and vegetables, and people from Iran coming to staff up the markets, to start appearing in the mosques and things like that. The embassy denied this was happening. The American government didn't want to believe it was happening. I tried to report it to them. They wouldn't listen, so I put it in a book. Of course, now when we do interviews, I do interviews about the book, no one says, you know, why is your opinion so different? And so if folks want to understand what we should have known, what we really knew but tried to pretend wasn't true in 2011, then I'd ask them please to take a look at my book, We Meant Well.
Thank you so much, Peter Van Buren, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
It was a great pleasure to be with you, and I am so pleased that there are still journalists who are trying to learn more about what happened in Iraq and not simply accepting what the mainstream media tries to tell us. Thank you for the work that you do.
This was Peter Van Buren, the author of the book We Meant Well, which was on the Iraq War. He's also a U.S. State Department veteran. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.